Sew with Monty. Today we're going to take our sleeve block, our basic sleeve pattern, and we're going to turn it into a two-piece sleeve, very similar to what you might have on a suit coat or a jacket, where it has an underarm portion and an upper sleeve portion. So the first thing I have done is, because this is a basic sleeve pattern built for a blouse or a top, the cuff opening was narrower. And I've opened it up to make it 10 inches so it would fit more like a jacket or a suit coat over your garment, so that there's more room in the wrist opening or the sleeve opening. So once I've added this out, I've added about 1 inch on each side, a little less than 1 inch on each side. I went from 8 1/4 to 10 for this particular pattern. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out, and then I'm going to show you how to turn it into a pre-bent two-piece sleeve. So now I've cut out the sleeve, and I have the extension here. As you can see, I went from 8 1/4 to 10 by adding a couple of inches plus a little bit in there. So my cuff opening now is 10 inches, and it's more like a jacket sleeve opening. I've taken the whole pattern and I've rolled it over, and I've taped the inseam of the sleeve together, the underarm seam, which then I've turned around and made sure it's centered in the middle of the sleeve, lining it up with the grain line of the sleeve and folding it on both sides. So my seam now is aligned with my grain line and folded on both sides, nice and crisp. This is really important that you make this line nice and crisp like this. Now we're getting ready to turn this into two pieces. This is the back of the sleeve. So you want to come in just inside the crease here, just a little bit, about 1/4 inch. And I'm going to take this line and I'm going to draw a line 1/4 inch from the crease. And this is going to be my separation line, where I separate the top sleeve from the under sleeve. I'm going to do the same thing on the front. Now, as I'm doing this can vary. Some people will push this line in 1/2 inch, even 1 inch sometimes. I'm going to go for just 1/4 because I don't want a big difference. But if you make your sleeve and you would like to have it, the seam, this is going to become a seam, in farther, you can just adjust it by coming over more. But for now, I'm just going to start with 1/4 inch roll inside of each side. This keeps the seam from being apparent from the outside when you're wearing the jacket, but it also keeps it balanced enough that you can do the manipulation to make the sleeve pre-bent. Once you have this, you're going to cut it open. Remember, this is taped together, and this is going to stay taped together now because we're not going to open this back up. So I'm just going to separate this section, which will be the underarm section, from the top arm section of my sleeve, like this. And one thing I forgot before we continue on, we want to find where our elbow is. And this is a really important little information you need to know. This is the underarm point. So we're going to go from the underarm point down to the cuff opening, which on this is 17 inches. Now, dead center of that would be 8 1/2 inches. So 8 1/2 would be the center of that. That would make 17. Now, you want to come up anywhere from 1/2 to 1 inch above that. That's going to be your elbow line. So in this case, I'm going to split the difference, and my elbow line is coming up 3/4 inch from the center of this point. This is my elbow line, okay? Now, perpendicular to the fold line and the grain line, not the outside edges, but perpendicular to this taped together underarm seam or my grain line, I'm going to draw a line across through here. And this represents where my actual elbow is. Why is it higher? Because in most cases, from your underarm point, because remember your underarm point's 1 inch below your actual armpit, down to your wrist, just below your wrist bone, is roughly, your elbow's about halfway. Now the difference that happens here is because your armhole is lower than your armpit. If you went from armpit to wrist bone, and you split the difference, you'd probably be very close to your elbow line. But because we've reduced this scoop in the underarm right here, then that makes this shorter than it is here. That's why you want to raise this point anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 inch up. I'm going for 3/4, but anywhere between 1/2 to 3/4 is good. So this represents my elbow. Now, knowing that I've already cut this open, I'm going to cut the other side open. And I'm going to mark on here that this is the front sleeve. So I'm going to put front, front, and back over here so that when I open it up I don't get confused, because there's going to be some changes made after this. So I love the sleeve, I love the outcome of it, and I love how easy it is to make. And this is the kind of sleeve that you would make for a jacket. Again, remember, where you put this line can vary. So some jackets might have it farther in on the front and maybe sometimes right on the fold in the back. So it just depends on the design and how whoever's making it decides to do it. So there's no real set rule how far in from the fold you go. Just make sure you are on the fold or at least inside the fold a little bit. Okay, so this is the front edge of my jacket right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to align it like this, and then above and below the elbow, about 2 inches above and about 1 inch below, I'm going to put notches. And I'm going to go ahead and do that so I know where the separation is. So these will become notches. I'm going to horseshoe them so I know they're notches. That keeps me in line here at my elbow. Now, let's talk about the other side. So over here is my back sleeve. And this is where the prevent part's going to come in. So right at the elbow line, I'm going to open this up and hinge it here, and I'm going to open this up and hinge it here. And I'm going to drop in a 1/2 inch on each of these pieces so that the line starts to bend this way. So let's start with the back or the upper sleeve, and I'm going to open it up here and leave a little hinge at the elbow right in front, not going all the way through. Remember, we have no seam allowance on this as of yet. Then I'm going to take a little piece of paper and I'm going to put underneath here, let's get the under sleeve out of the way. We're working with the top sleeve first. And I'm going to pin down the top part of my sleeve to my paper. Let's get down here a little bit farther. And then I'm going to measure over a 1/2 inch at the opening and pin the other side down. So just like this, and then I'm going to measure down 1/2 inch on this outside edge. And I'm going to go take this little line right here, and I'm going to pin it down with tape to this edge. Now I've got some ghost paper under here that I'm just going to remove because that was extra where I opened the sleeve with them. And I'm going to tape it all down like this. Now you can start to see the bend in my elbow. See here how it's bending? Now this too can be a variance. I've used a 1/2 inch. If you want more of a bend, you could use 3/4 of an inch. Or if you want less of a bend, you could go up to 3/8. I'd say 3/8 would be your minimum that you'd need to put in here. And then probably up to 1 inch would be the maximum. So anywhere from 3/8 to 1 inch could be varied here. I've got a subtle bend. I don't want a huge bend. And this again depends on what you're looking for and your personal taste and fit. So now we're just going to get rid of the excess paper under here. And I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to tape this down on the underside. Always remember, tape down your pieces that you are patching into a pattern on the underside as well as top side. That way they don't come off on you and you don't have a surprise someday and your pattern is falling apart. Now if you have a definitive point here, like an inverted point, you need to soften it with a curve. Mine's very subtle, so I'm just going to smooth it out by cutting it a little bit. Same out here, you don't want a point, so you're just going to go from one edge to the other, having a soft bend, no point, no sharp points here. It's not a dart. Okay, we already have these notches in there, so when we finish the back, we'll put notches in there as well. Now, we want to open up this section just like we did the upper sleeve. So the under sleeve is going to get the same treatment. So I'm going to cut it open here. The beauty of doing it like this, where you're working inside the pattern instead of the outside edges, you're guaranteed that your pieces are going to fit back together because you haven't changed the outside lines of your pattern. Whatever you did to one, you've done to the other. You know they're going to walk again and be true, and you're not going to have any issues sewing it up. So I've taped down the upper part of the under sleeve. I'm going to measure down a 1/2 inch right here. And I'm going to place this little guy right here. See, and tape him down. and I'm doing this beautiful, soft, pre-bent sleeve. It's going to look fabulous in a jacket and fit very good as well because it changes the fit. I'm just going to close this up just a wee bit because I see a little bit of a difference there. And then I'm going to cut it out the same way, softening the points. No points. You don't want a point there. You want a nice soft curve. Very subtle. Just a nice soft curve. If you end up with a very radical point when you're doing this, make sure you soften it out with your very curve. And taping it down on the back. Now, I'm going to take the back sleeve and I'm going to put it together at the top here with the top sleeve and undersleeve. And then just above the elbow bend, I'm going to put in my double 3/8 notch. That's going to represent that this is the back part of the sleeve. So I'm going to go one here and come up 3/8 and do another one. That's the symbol for back, is a double 3/8 notch. So that tells me that this goes to the back, that goes to the front, and I don't mix my sleeves up and try to sew them up backwards. So that's it. So simple, but so beautiful. Now I want to talk to you before we go any further about the sleeve cap and the armhole. If I were doing this for a jacket, right now I left the armhole and the sleeve the same, and it's basically a blouse or shirt sleeve opening. But if I were doing this for a jacket, I might lift the top of my sleeve. So let me get those pieces and show you what I'm talking about. So if I were doing this for a jacket, let's say, I might open this sleeve, the shoulder slope up right here. So this is my shoulder and this is my front shoulder. Right now they look like this, but I may want a little more ease in here because this is a jacket. So I might come in here and put an 1/8 on both sides, which would be a 1/4 inch. So I'd add an 1/8 here and an 1/8 here to square off the shoulder slope slightly, just so I have a little more room because this is, again, a jacket. You may want to lower this point an 1/8 as well. That's optional. This might be enough right here. But let's say I added an 1/8 and an 1/8 to this shoulder slope and squared it off a little bit for the jacket. Then I would want to add the same in my sleeve cap. Well, how do I do that? Do I just swell it out, flesh it out by drawing it and hope it fits? No. Here's what you would do. You would draw a line. I'm going to draw this in light color right across the mid part of your sleeve cap. And then you would open it up here, spread it out, and put 1/8 of an inch in here, which would be an 1/8 over here, an 1/8 over here, which is exactly what you added to your sleeve cap in your armhole, an 1/8 and an 1/8. And then you blend it off, and you know that this sleeve cap is going to fit exactly back to your sleeve opening. Nothing changes. Your shoulder seam stays the same. Everything stays the same. So if you choose to do that, that's just a little extra. You can do that and stay inside your pattern instead of trying to redraw this and end up way off chart. So anyway, let's get back to the sleeve. We're going to leave the armhole as is for this assignment. That's just a little extra information. So now what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead, add a 1/2 inch seam allowance all around my pattern and cut it out in muslin. One other thing I want to do though first. See the bottom here, how it's crooked? So now that I have this bottom edge all one piece, I can fix this underarm sleeve part because it's off. It's got a definite divot in here. So I can do this too before I cut it out and add seam allowance and cut my muslin. So right in here, along this edge, where it comes to a point, and it's an uneven point at that, I can come in here and soften this curve. It's okay to have a little curve, but it's not a point. See, and that way it's a nice smooth transition. So my underarm sleeve is going to be every bit as beautiful as the rest of my sleeve. So let's cut this out, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut it out in muslin and add my 1/2 inch seam allowances and sew it up and show you how pretty this 2-piece sleeve comes out. So very easy to make, but it gives so much impact for such a simple little pattern alteration. So on to the muslin, and then we'll show it on the form. So now we have our sleeve sewn up, and once again I've used satin so that I could get a good critical look at how the sleeve is hanging. If you notice at the bottom of the sleeve, you can kind of see how it's tipped forward from the side seam. Let me zoom in a little bit more, and you can see that the actual seam is forward of the side seam of the form. That is the pre-bent part of the sleeve, and it has a soft natural curve. It's not radical, but it makes such a beautiful sleeve and a very comfortable sleeve at that. So this is very much what you'd find in a suit coat or a jacket, outer coat, this type of sleeve. Now let me show you the front view of the sleeve. Now I want to show you the seam here. I could have rolled this seam under more. You see, you can actually see this seam. So the front seam probably could have been rolled under another inch and not been seen at all. So these are things you need to observe when you're making this, and it may take making a muslin to actually see this before you sew up your real sleeve. So I encourage, if you're trying to do a two-piece sleeve, make a muslin like this first and save yourself a lot of aggravation and frustration by making it and then going, gosh, I wish I'd just done this or that. So that is what's happening on the front sleeve. Now let me go and I'll show you the back sleeve as well. The back sleeve, again, the seam shows. Now on the back, it's not that big of an issue. It's actually better if the seam actually does ride along close to the fold of the sleeve, because this allows the wearer to have more flexibility in the elbow area. So I don't mind it showing back here as much, but I think in the future I may adjust my pattern and move that front sleeve forward a little bit or underneath the arm a little bit so it doesn't show quite so much. Anyway, this is the sleeve, and I really like it. Overall, I like the fit of it, just an adjustment on that front seam, and I think I've got a very beautiful two-piece sleeve.